Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
This is Wayne Callan for Attitude Magazine. Glad you can be with us today. Every day, our magazine and website receive lots of emails from worried parents looking for help for their kids. Most of the time, those parents are worried about how their child is doing in school and how to make things better. It makes sense when you think about it. A child's confidence and happiness is tied to how they feel about their school performance. How your child is meeting academic and social challenges at school affects the whole family. These challenges become amplified as teens enter high school. Sure, your middle schooler faced the pressures of having to report to several teachers, had lots of homework, and had to fit in extracurricular activities into her schedule. But in high school, there is just more and more of everything. A teen who did well in middle school might find the demands of high school tougher and get off to a bad start. A child who handled the organizational challenges in middle school might find a new, larger school overwhelming, leading to newfound disorganization, forgetting to bring home books, for instance, or copy down a homework assignment. It is a tough transition. We are pleased to have top education expert Ann Dolin with us today to sort this all out and give us strategies to help your teen have a running start when he walks through the doors of high school. Ann has been working with parents and kids for 25 years, guiding children to tackle challenges at school and giving parents strategies to help their child excel in school without nagging them to death. She is the author of Homework Made Simple and a Guide to Private School. You can learn more about Ann at www.annDolin.com. It's great to have you here today.
Wayne, thank you so much. You know, every day parents call my office and they're looking for help for their kids. And they're concerned, and they're especially concerned when kids are making that jump from middle school to high school and also from elementary to middle school. But here are the things that I hear, especially when they're making that transition from middle to high school. I hear things like, oh my gosh, he barely survived in middle school. What's it going to be like in high school? Sometimes they'll say, study skills? What study skills? I don't think my kid ever studied before. I have to nag him to get anything done. Sometimes they'll say, I'm just so worried she won't be able to keep up with all this extra work. But ultimately they say, I feel like I'm the homework police, and I don't want that role anymore. Parents often report that they have to poke, they prod, they nag, they cajole, they do whatever it takes to get their kids to do two things, and that's to focus and finish. So I'm wondering if that rings a bell for any of you out there. Well, I can tell you that transition years are really the hardest for kids. You know, as a teacher, I saw this all the time, and as a tutor, and now running my tutoring and coaching company, I see our greatest volume of calls in 7th and 9th grade when kids move from elementary to middle and middle to high school. And the reasons are pretty obvious. You know, when they're younger, they have a homeroom and a desk. But now in middle school, they have 7 subjects, 7 teachers, and 7 different sets of expectations. In my experience, there is no greater disconnect between a child's executive function abilities and the expectations than in middle school. But by high school, you would think, okay, my child is getting more mature. This should be easier. But it isn't always like that, because there continues to be a lag between the child's abilities and their executive functioning skills and the expectations in the classroom. And the work gets harder, there's no doubt. And also, kids are under greater pressure because they know that these grades count. And if they want to go to college, these grades count on their application. And the other thing is that they have to deal with block scheduling. And so for many kids, they've never had this experience before. We'll talk a little bit about block scheduling in a few minutes. So here are the common obstacles. In the poll you just did, Wayne, parents said they're worried about the heavier workload, and for good reason. It's really turning work in on time and being able to juggle these 7 different sets of expectations, knowing what the teacher wants and when the teacher wants it. That's really hard for kids. But along the way, they have to be organized. They have to know not just with their things, but their time, what exactly they have to do, and they have to get it turned in on time. And many of our kids have gotten by on their intelligence in the past, but now they actually have to have good study skills and habits. Here's the thing about many students with ADHD. They often resist their parents' help, and they won't always reach out to their teachers either, I should say. And often when kids are struggling, especially with a low grade, often parents don't find out about it until it's too late. So what can you do as a parent when you're thinking of this transition from middle to high school? Well, my experience has been thinking about it in terms of one thing that you want to help your child with is really the goal. We'd all love to fix lots of things in our kids, but the reality is that we've been trying to do this for many years and it probably hasn't worked that well. And that's why choosing one thing is really the best way to go, because it sets your child up for the most success. So let's talk about those one things. One thing. Maybe it's getting homework started earlier. Maybe in the past, your child has stayed up really late at night and it's been hard for them to get up in the morning because they've started their homework too late. Sometimes it's planning ahead. For many kids, they can actually get the daily work done, but if they have an assignment due in 2 weeks, that's very hard for them. For other kids, it's keeping their binders organized. And then for others, it's studying more effectively or even learning to study at all. So think to yourself, what is the one thing that could make a big change in the freshman year? And I always like to talk to kids with a conversation. Sometimes it's helpful when we ask our kids for an appointment, just like we would an adult. So we might say, hey, Jimmy, can we talk about this after dinner tonight? How does 7:30 work for you? Whenever I'm trying to make change with a student, I often use the words I've noticed. You can say something like, I've noticed that getting to bed at an earlier time has been hard. That actually is accepted better by kids than saying, you never get to sleep on time. Because anytime we put a you in the conversation, it feels punitive and kids can go on the defensive. So let's go with the getting to bed earlier and starting homework a little bit earlier. Let's say we want to make that change. Well, it's a valid thing to change because procrastination is real in the general population, and it's even worse in students with ADHD. Now, on average, students procrastinate at a rate of 86% in high school, and 88% of students report that they procrastinate in college. The problem with our students is that they don't always have a great sense of time. And sometimes we think that they procrastinate because they simply don't want to do something. But a lot of times it's that they're unaware of time itself and elapsed time. And I know you've had my colleague Ari Tuckman on before, and he's really a great psychologist. He talks a lot about time management. And one of the things he says is that many students with ADHD have a soft internal clock, meaning for them, time does not tick loudly. When you say we have to be somewhere at 5 and it's 4, they really don't have a sense of what they need to do to get ready for 5. They don't really have a sense of what that hour is like. Whereas somebody with a loud internal clock, for them, time ticks loudly. So they have a great sense of when they need to get ready, how they need to go about getting ready and being somewhere on time, planning that assignment out in 2 weeks. So our goal for our students isn't lots of, tricky suggestions and new strategies, although I'm going to share with you some strategies today. But it's really for kids to get them to know themselves, to become self-aware. I often ask kids, if you can't get started, if you really, really don't want to do something, what is an easy way you can make yourself get going on something? And that is the key. You don't want to have to sit there and poke and prod your child. You basically want your child to have 1 or 2 strategies that when they don't feel like doing something, they can have a hack that allows them to get started. So that's our goal, to becoming self-aware, to know yourself. There are times when kids can get started on homework. They can start right after school, after about a 30-minute break, before dinner, after dinner, before bed, before school. And then a kid recently reminded me that you can do it on the bus on the way to school. And then another one said, well, actually, there's one other time in the study hall right before school, right before that class. But for our students, even if they get started, even if they lay out their assignments before dinner, that's super helpful. Even if they just figure out what they have to do before dinner, that really reduces procrastination because now they have some type of agenda in their head, or better yet, written down. But it helps them to think ahead and to resist getting started too late. They're often resisting because it feels big and large for them. But by just knowing what you have to do, you're more likely to get started. So kids need a couple of hacks. The first is time. We work with kids all the time. Our educational coaches help kids with three things: organization, time management, and study skills. And it's a little bit different than a tutor who might just work with kids on, say, a subject like math or science, or writing is a big one. But an educational coach teaches kids hacks. And so I want to share with you a few that really work well for kids. One is to keep a timer. Even we think timers are for younger kids, but they're not. High school kids love physical timers too. And it's better if it's an actual timer than, on their phone. But one that I love is Time Timer. And you can buy a super small one that kids keep at their study area. And basically, kids set it for a very short period of time, like 10 minutes. And they say to themselves, I'm going to work on this math as hard as I can, as best I can, and focus as much as I can just for 10 minutes, and then I'll take a break. And often they can keep going. They don't need that break, but they do need that extra stimulation, that timer, to get them started. Another is by task. Okay, I really don't want to do this math, but I'm just going to do the things that are easy for me, and then I'll take a break. Or, you know what, I'm just going to do half of this, and then I'll take a break. The other thing that kids encounter in high school, in ninth grade, is block scheduling. I've noticed that more and more middle schoolers are experienced with block scheduling because it's being pushed down to the lower grades. But traditionally, we'll start in ninth grade. Most schools have a schedule where classes are longer, which from a teacher's point of view, it sounds really good. Instead of 50 minutes with your student, you now have an hour and a half. You can get more done. But for kids with ADHD, this is really, really hard for them to sit in class this long. And it's hard for them because they see that teacher Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then the following week on Tuesday, Thursday. So, for a lot of kids, when you get an assignment Monday, it's not due till Wednesday. They may start it on Monday night or maybe early on Tuesday, but most kids that I know, especially those with ADHD, started at around 10 o'clock on Tuesday night. And therein lies the problem. If they don't know quite how to do it, they're really, really stuck. So we always encourage kids, and this is something you can do as a parent, to ask, what do you have that you can just get started on tonight? Even if you just take it out and look at it and even don't do it, or write your name and do the first problem, just knowing what you have to do is huge. Because if you need help, you can ask somebody in your class. You can go see your teacher. You can go online and try to Google the problem. But it allows you a little bit of, it buys you some time so you're not in that crunch period super late the night before it's due. The other thing I've seen kids struggle with is long-term planning in high school. Maybe this is the one thing that you want your child with. Maybe, they can do the day-to-day, but that essay that's due later in the month is going to be hard for them. I like setting up reoccurring appointments with kids to talk about this. I have a high school, I have one in college, and I have a high school sophomore. And on Sundays, I'll ask him, what do you have coming up this week? What's big? What do you need to think about now? Because what will happen to kids if they're not asked this question, or if they're left to their own devices, they kind of just show up on Monday, not at all thinking about the week ahead. And when you do that, you're already behind because you might have a test on Monday. You probably have something due on Tuesday that you really haven't thought about. So by asking kids, what do you have? And giving them the opportunity to take out, open up Blackboard or their homework portal and just poke around on their Google Calendar, figure out what they have going on. It's super helpful for starting out the week well. And you can also ask questions like, what could get in your way? Your child might say, oh, I have my sports banquet on Wednesday, or I have choral practice on Thursday night. That's going to take a lot of my time. And it allows them to think ahead a little bit. The other thing I've found to be helpful for kids is to schedule a time to get organized. I found that in ninth grade, and really in any other grade, most kids start the year out in a super organized fashion. And this makes sense because you probably brought them to Staples or Office Depot or ordered their supplies, and their binders are meticulous. They're beautiful. But if you look at them a month later, they probably look nothing like they did that first week of school. Because kids don't always have a way to stay organized, I love the idea of the clean sweep, and it's something that you can do even with older students. And you say to them, look, you bring up a time to talk. Maybe you say, let's talk about this tonight, and ask, would it make sense if everybody in the family sat down on Sunday night, say after dinner from 7 to 7:20, and we all got organized for the week? So for kids, it may be putting their papers in the right section of their binder. It could even be cleaning out their backpack, sorting through all the items in their binder. But really having kids do this once a week helps them a lot to maintain organization, because without this structure, they're unlikely to do it on their own. And what I also like about a clean sweep is that it's not just your kid with ADHD or your messy kid that has to do it. It's everybody in the family. So maybe for you, you clean out your purse or the junk drawer or even the spice cabinet, but then all of the kids are in on the action of getting organized. And then for some kids, having a monthly time, and this is something our coaches do, they found a lot of success with it. It might be a little bit harder as a parent unless you have a child who's really willing, is to carve out time to get rid of that old stuff in their binder. With a lot of kids I've worked with in May, they'll have stuff in their binder from October, and they're really nervous about getting rid of stuff. But they can still take it out of their binder and put it somewhere else. It just doesn't need to be in their binder, because that creates a lot of stuff and that creates a lot of stress because you can't find what you need. So we use the CAT method. It stands for CAT with a K, keep, archive, toss. What is it in your science folder that you need to keep? Leave that in there. What is it that you can archive? What is it that you might need later, but you just don't need right now? Could be an old test or quiz. And then what can you toss? Those are things, just get rid of it. You don't need the daily homework assignment typically, so you can toss that. Maybe it's that you want your child to be a little bit more efficient and effective with studying. And just like with procrastination, we'll often ask kids, what is it that you can do that is okay for you to help study? So a lot of kids think that studying is just, they don't know how to do it. They feel overwhelmed by it, so they avoid it. But there are actually some easy things they can do. I did an informal study of a group of kids and freshmen and sophomores, and I asked them, how do you make yourself study when you don't want to study? What are some hacks that you use? What are your preferred study methods that tend to have good results for you? And kids named all types of things. But what I noticed is that these kids all said, and these were actually kids with ADHD, that Quizlet and practice tests help them the most. Quizlet is an app. It's a web-based program that kids also have on their phones that allows them to study pretty much anything in a flashcard and game format. So it's like a modern day version of good old fashioned flashcards that we used as kids. And you can play games and it tests you, and it's super cool. And for kids that aren't really willing to put forth time, let's say they have a biology test, because that's a common ninth grade class, and they need to memorize these terms. It's likely that somebody has already uploaded the chapter 1 words and definitions, so they can find that set of vocabulary words and definitions in Quizlet, pull it down to their screen, and they can practice with the work that somebody else has done. Now, it would be better if they could make their own, but they don't always want to do that. The other thing that kids can do is to work on practice tests. And practice tests, especially in ninth grade, can be in the form of a study guide. So when the teacher passes out the study guide, many kids take the path of least resistance and they'll just fill it out and they say they've studied. But a better method is for them to cover up the answers and quiz themselves. It's not hard to do. It doesn't take a ton of time, but it ensures that they've at least practiced and studied. There are also some apps that I found to be helpful for kids. These are actually apps that kids have told me about that they like. The first one is for a Mac, and it's called Self-Control. So often when kids are doing their homework, it's not in a vacuum because they probably have things like Netflix open or YouTube or their Twitter feed or whatever, and they're not completely focused on what they need to do. So Self-Control and Stay Focused, which is a Chrome extension, both do the same things. They allow kids to blacklist the websites they deem to be distracting. So let's say they don't want to go to Yahoo and trade their fantasy sports players, and they don't want to go to YouTube. They blacklist those websites and they move a toggle bar for however many minutes they want. Let's say 20 minutes. And within that 20 minutes, it allows them to be ultra focused because they're not being distracted by those websites. And then if they try to go to those websites, it won't let them. They can try to disable the app. They can try to restart their computer. But in that 20 minutes, they cannot go to those websites. So it allows kids to have control over their study time. And it wouldn't be something that you would load on their laptop and tell them to do. It would be something that you could suggest and see if they like it. I often encourage kids to be a detective. Hey, see if this helps you. It might or it might not. The other one that I really like is for phones. And a lot of kids say, oh, but Mom, I just have to have my phone to do my homework. First of all, that isn't true, probably 98% of the time. But when you've got an older kid, it's honestly hard to take it away from them when they're 17 or they're 16 and they've had it for this long. So I've often found that teaching kids how to use their phone is a better approach. So this is an app. It's called Forest. And it allows kids to do basically the same thing as Stay Focused and Self-Control. And so they click this app on their phone. I think it's $1.99 or something like this. And on their home screen, a beautiful tree starts to grow. And they set the tree for a certain amount of time, say 15 minutes. And within that 15 minutes, the tree will grow leaves and get bigger and really beautiful. However, during that time, if they go to Snapchat or if they go to Instagram, the app will give the child a warning, and then the tree will wither and die. So your goal is to stay as focused as you can on the work you're doing and not on all the apps on your phone for that specific amount of time. Kids love this. It's actually super motivating because once they get a tree that grows to fruition, they get this medal, and then it asks them if they want to try it again. And before they know it, they have a whole forest of trees. So sometimes parents ask, well, what are some more apps, or how can I find more information on strategies? And on our website, we have a blog. Our website is ectutoring.com/our-blog. And it has that search button. So you can search organization or motivation or apps or whatever, and you'll find articles. We also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to that parents say really helps them. And it's ectutoring.com/subscribe-to-our-newsletter. At the end of the day, apps and strategies will absolutely help, but strong communication is essentially what will help your child make the best transition from middle to high school. So we can, react to our kids in the moment. This is called the reactive approach. We're often in crisis mode when we find out about a bad grade or a missing assignment, and we're all over our kids, and we'll say things like, oh my gosh, put that phone down or I'm taking it away. I can't believe you got a D on your math test, or you didn't start that yet? Did you have a test tomorrow? Or no wonder you got a C on that test. And then on our better days, we might say, oh, honey, don't forget to study for math. But really, when we have a more proactive approach, it tends to help kids take a little bit more ownership. So talking to them about how they're doing before the problem arises. Having that weekly meeting to talk about the week ahead is often super helpful. And if we do see a bad grade or we get an email from the teacher, and if we log on to the homework portal with our child and find out that he hasn't done some work, in the moment we can be really upset. Or we can say, you know what, I can tell we're both upset about this and that we're worried. How about we talk about this after dinner tonight? That way you can think about it a little bit. You have a cooler head. Your child isn't probably angry or upset, and you can have a better discussion about what's going on very calmly without any yelling. I've also found that asking the right questions helps kids. You know, one of the common things we ask when our kids come home is, do you have homework? And it's an okay question, but it's a yes or no question. And even when kids say, no, I don't, they probably do anyways. So I like asking kids, what are your priorities today? Now, I like this question because it gets kids thinking about what they're going to do, first, second, or third. In a perfect world, your daughter will say, oh, Mom, what a great question. Actually, I have a chemistry test on Friday. I've got an English essay due on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, I have a math quiz, which I really need to start studying for. So I'm going to begin that tonight. It's unlikely your child will say that to you. But what it will do is get your child firing up those executive functioning skills, thinking about what they need to do, even if they don't say it out loud to you. I remember this was a few years ago. I was having this conversation with my younger son, and I said, so what are your priorities tonight? And he's like, nothing. And I said, and at his school, it's really great because unlike a lot of schools, the teachers post regularly to the homework portal. So he can go on and see his homework, and it all populates in Google Calendar, which is really fantastic. And he's like, I don't have anything. And I said, oh, I wonder what your homework portal says. So he's like, it's going to say the same thing. So he goes onto his homework portal, and it was one of these nights where he actually didn't have a lot to do, but apparently he was supposed to bring in this book from school that he had ordered on Amazon. And by seeing that on the homework portal, he ran over, opened the Amazon book, and threw it in his backpack. He didn't say a word to me, but just that question kind of prompted him. I also like the question that I mentioned earlier, what could get in your way tonight? So sometimes kids don't think, they often overestimate how much time they have and underestimate how long it will take them to do anything. So they think, oh my gosh, I can totally get that 5-paragraph essay done in a half hour. No big deal. The reality is that's going to take them a much longer time than a half hour. And they probably haven't thought that they have to go to a sports practice tonight, or they have something else going on. But by asking them what could get in the way, that's basically saying, what could prevent you from doing this? Instead of asking a question like, did you study for your science test? You might ask, what's the first thing you can do to get ready for that science test? Again, firing up those executive functioning abilities so kids can break something that might feel really big down, that they might procrastinate about and resist, to think about what's easy that I can do. Or instead of saying, you better start that history project, you might say, what's something small you can do to get started on that history project? It doesn't feel as big to kids. I have tons of powerful questions on our website, and you can go to that specific list of powerful questions at ectutoring.com/powerful-questions. So when I help kids think ahead to high school and talk to parents about this issue, I often will recommend that to think about the fact that if they struggled in middle school, it's likely that they're going to struggle in high school. I know that kind of feels negative, but it's the reality. Kids don't grow up over the summer. And often when they've struggled in a certain area with organization, time management, staying on top of things, that's going to likely be the case. So when we send our kids off to high school and we say, oh, hopefully this year will be different, fingers crossed, it's your best job, it doesn't always have the results that we want. My experience has taught me that getting support earlier in the year is much more beneficial for kids than waiting until that first report card in, say, November, or that parent conference time. So by having a safety net in the beginning of the year, it's better for kids because they can start out the year successfully. And when they start out successfully, they're likely to continue that. But if you start out in a hole and all of a sudden it's a lot to keep track of, and now they're a little bit behind, and then you see their grades, and then everybody's upset, digging out of that hole is really difficult for kids, especially kids with ADHD, because they often have such negative feelings about school already. So what does that look like? What kind of help? Often high schools will offer some type of jumpstart course right at the end of summer before school. Even if it's an all-day orientation that's optional, absolutely sign your kid up. Even if your child is kicking and screaming that they don't want to go, put them in the class. These classes are actually really helpful. Other things you can do, you can get an educational coach on board if you feel like helping your child hasn't resulted in positivity in the past. And often that happens. Kids are most comfortable with their parents, so they'll take out their frustrations on their parents. But often when it's a neutral person that doesn't have skin in the game, they don't have an emotional history with your child, often kids will listen to somebody else far more than they'll listen to a parent. So having a coach in place to help with making sure they're able to stay on top of assignments, that they've planned ahead, their binders are generally organized, they can create a little to-do homework list for themselves. Those are things a coach can do, and that's a good thing to have in place early on. But maybe your child that's not the bigger issue. Maybe they often fall behind in a cumulative subject like math or science, and it's really frustrating for them. Now, I often think of these kids in class as like Swiss cheese. They sit in class and sometimes they're focused and sometimes they're not. So they come home to do their homework and they've got these big holes in their learning, just like Swiss cheese. And so it's really hard for them to do the homework. They don't always know how to do it. So then they only do what they know. And then the next day, because they didn't understand what was on the first day and that builds upon itself, slowly they get behind and they stop doing homework altogether. So sometimes they may need a subject tutor to make sure that they're filling in those gaps and they understand what they're to do. And that person is also really can be good at saying, okay, and tomorrow you're going to see this. Because when kids know what to expect in class the next day, they can often be more focused. And sometimes it's a little bit of both. I also think it's helpful to absolutely go to the open house at the end of the summer, meet the teachers, ask questions like, how can my child get extra help? Or even, how do you find out about your child's progress? How is that reported? Are the grades sent every 2 weeks? Can you log on in real time? What time does the teacher post this homework portal every day? Does she post every day? Does she post on the homework portal, or does she post in Google Calendar? What exactly are his expectations? And at the open house, my experience has been with many kids that I've worked with over the years, their parents are really concerned about how they're going to do in school. Can they keep up? Are their grades going to be okay? But kids, they're concerned about who they're going to sit with at lunch. Are they going to get lost? What if they can't do their locker combination? Will they be embarrassed? All of the things that have to do with more social cues that often parents don't think about. So we can't control everything, but there are some things that we can control to make that transition the first few days a lot easier. So when your child gets a schedule at the open house or even before, they're also going to get a map of the school. And it's great for kids to walk their schedule 3 times. So get the map of the school out, look to see what classroom each teacher is in, and do that walk from class to class, and do it 3 times. So this class is closer to that class, and I can go to the bathroom at this time, but not at that time. So these little things can make a big difference in anxiety. The other thing is that kids don't use lockers these days like they did when we were in school. Now I've found that many high schools are actually trying to get rid of their lockers. Some high schools still require freshmen to use a locker. So if your child does have a locker and they're going to use it, make sure they can do the lock automatically 3 times. They can work the combination 3 times to automaticity. So they can do it and they're not worried about it on that first day. And then kids will post all over Snapchat and Instagram their schedules. So they find out who's in a class, who's in my algebra class, who has my lunch. This is super helpful to kids because it allows them to know what to expect, who they're going to sit with in lunch. So I hope that these things were helpful. I have an online class called Getting Past Procrastination, and I have a section on that transition to high school that parents have said has helped them. And that's on my website as well at ectutoring.com/GPP. It's all about getting organized, beating procrastination, and ending the homework battles. So, Wayne, I am going to turn it back over to you. I know that parents may have questions.
Yes, there are plenty of them. A lot of parents have asked or sort of asked how taking steps at the end of middle school, right before high school, with the IEP and 504 plan might be able to make it a more graceful, easier transition to high school. Do you have any recommendations on what parents might do with IEPs? Not specific, but just a basic, system that they should or plan they should follow to make sure that the things that they have in middle school stay in place in high school.
Most schools will have a transition meeting for students that are in middle school to make sure that they transition well into high school. And so this is super valuable. And if it's not offered, request it. Request that there's a representative from your school and hopefully somebody from the high school there to make that transition easier. And if that can't happen, go and find out who your case manager is at the high school level and go and meet with that person. I can't tell you how many times I've seen kids with, not as much with IEPs. Those tend to be, people know about those, but certainly with 504s, where kids will be in a class and 2 months later, the parent will say, this teacher didn't even know my kid had a 504. So as a teacher, as a former teacher, I always found it very helpful when parents, I was both a special ed teacher and a general ed teacher, when parents came to me and said, here's my child's IEP, which I already knew about, but I've noticed that my child does really well when he meets with his teacher on a weekly basis, or when there's some type of communication system between me and you. Is there something that we could set up now? That 5-10 minute meeting of just explaining your child how your child tends to work best without putting any more work on the teacher is super helpful. It gives you peace of mind, and it allows the teacher to know your child just a little bit more, even if it's a phone call. But I like to use the words I've noticed because it doesn't put the teacher on the defensive. Sometimes when teachers think, oh, wow, and another parent is calling me, I have all these things to do before school starts, just say, can I just have 5 minutes of your time? And I find that teachers are receptive. It allows them to know your child before any trouble erupts.
Mm-hmm. Lots of questions about how to deal with the increased workload and the increased social opportunities. Sports, after-school clubs, social events. Parents are sort of conflicted about they don't want to cut back. They want their teen to have friends, and they want them to participate and develop and enrich their lives in the extracurriculars. But how does one try to introduce balance into that as a parent?
That's such an important question because for kids, this is probably more important to them than academics. And I've found that taking something away from a child that they're really good at and then on the altar of academic performance doesn't typically end well. So let's say your child's a really great lacrosse player. They get a lot of positivity from that. You want to keep them in lacrosse, even if it means that they may not have quite enough time for homework. You can make it up in other ways. With kids that do feel like they have a lot on their plate, maybe their homework takes them a little bit longer, I've encouraged them to use weird windows. And weird windows are these little periods of time. It could be, like they end school at 3:00. They don't start practice until 3:30. They've got this half hour where if they can even get 15 minutes of homework done, or even if they create their to-do list of homework, or they study on, the content that they need to know for an upcoming test on Quizlet on their phone, that's super valuable. So when kids have a lot going on, unless they are definitely overscheduled, and sometimes they are, sometimes they're playing, a sport and they have all these other things going on, that may be too much. And it's too much if you see your child staying up super late or they seem stressed out all the time. That might be a sign. But in general, I like to allow kids the opportunity to partake in all of these things because it makes them feel good about themselves. I think the biggest issue that I see is kids that play fall sports because they go into their freshman year not really understanding the workload, especially if they're taking classes that may be a little bit challenging for them. And they're not getting home until 8 o'clock from their sports practice. So they haven't used their time after school well. And now they have all this work when they get home. They're staying up late. They're exhausted the next day. So that's an opportunity to talk to them about these short windows of time, to use the weekends very, very wisely. Because when kids have a lot going on, they have to use the weekends wisely. And for these kids, it can't be Sunday night at 8 o'clock thinking about these things. It might be that you have an agreement with your child that, before they go out on Friday night or whatever they do, they sit down with you, even for 15 minutes, and you talk about their plan for the weekend and for the beginning of the week.
Mm-hmm. Several parents wanted you to just repeat that URL for the powerful questions on your website.
Sure. It's EC Tutoring. Let me go back to it.
Oh.
All right. It's ectutoring.com/powerful-questions.
Okay. Yeah. Sarah has asked, my son will be starting high school next year. I've heard that our high school does not want to hear from parents, but from the students. They basically want them to advocate for themselves. Do you have any suggestions to empower kids going into high school?
Yes, and I'm so glad that question was asked. I meant to cover this earlier, and it's probably one of the most important things you can do and encourage your child to do. It is true, certainly if you need to reach out to the teacher, absolutely reach out to the teacher. But your first line of defense is to have your child talk to the teacher. So at that open house, ask, or your child asks, how can I go for help? And my experience has been that when kids write an email or they go for help right at the very beginning of the year, even the first week when they don't have a lot to do, but they go and they experience what it's like to sit in the classroom after school and ask for help, they're far more likely to do it later on. But if they wait until, say, November or December or October when they're really having a hard time, now they're anxious. And now they're like, I don't want to go because this feels awkward and uncomfortable and I'm not doing it. So if you really encourage them to go right away and they have to have a specific question to ask, it will go well. So for example, they don't want to go in and say, hi, I'm Jimmy. Can you help me? Because the teacher will say, what do you want help with? I don't know. Well, that's not going to go well. So if they go in and say, hi, can I get help with my math homework? I'm struggling with numbers 15 and 16. And sit with the teacher and get that experience of positive feedback. Oh, okay, yes, it's not so bad. She helped me with these problems and it seemed to go well. Therefore, I may go back again. The same with communicating with teachers over email. Often if you say to your child, oh, send your teacher an email, ask about it, they will not ask because that feels uncomfortable to them. So for the first one, develop a template with your child. Dear Mrs. Smith, I'm wondering if I might have an extra day to turn in my biology homework. I'm really struggling with this part of it and I need this amount of time. Or may I come to you after school on Tuesday? I know you don't usually have office hours, but I'm wondering if you might be there at 3 o'clock. Anytime you can practice writing an email, and then they can save it so they can see how to do it in the future, and they get a positive response back, they're far more likely to do it later on. But it has to be at the beginning of the year. That usually has the best outcome.
Mm-hmm. This is a tough question, but I'll throw it at you anyway. This mom asks, our high school freshmen started out the year strong, fairly organized, great grades. Second semester, no longer using the planner, consistently using tools to help him stay organized. His homework is often not done. I'm trying to help reignite his desire to turn in his work, but he becomes bitter and angry with me, and it impacts our relationship. I would love some tools on how to help motivate him and stay firm with him without losing our mother-son relationship. That's a tough one, I know.
It is. Motivation is so complicated. I wish there was a switch we could flip and make all our kids want to do well in school. But that question makes me wonder if something else is going on. It's not typical for kids to do super well and then all of a sudden tank. There's usually something that's occurring. Sometimes you may see a gradual pattern of, wow, now the work is getting really hard and the grades aren't where they are, but they're not terrible. So anytime you see a big drop off like that, that is often a red flag to bring in outside help. So it might be that you talk to the teachers to see what they're saying. You go to the counselor at school. If your child has an IEP, talk to the special ed teacher or a case manager. See if you can get a little bit more information, not just from your child, but maybe what's going on at school. Sometimes, though, kids are just really plain out resistant to working with their parent. And no matter what you do, they may not want to work with you. So your best option is to be supportive and ask and really just try to have a dialogue about how they're feeling, what's going on, without even asking about grades or overdue assignments or anything like that. I would take the whole academic performance piece out of the equation and see if you can have a heart-to-heart with your child to see what else could be going on. If it really is an issue of they started out well, they felt confident, now the work is really hard, and that's what's causing it, that's when you probably want to bring in, maybe a tutor or a coach or somebody else to help with the academic piece. Typically, it's not that they're struggling in every single subject. Usually, there are a couple of culprits. And for kids with ADHD, it's often writing is a big one in English. And then it's a cumulative subject, like where one skill builds upon another, like math or a math-based science, like physics or chemistry. So see if you can figure out, what is it? Is there something else going on, or is it really the academic piece? And then elicit outside help.
Mm-hmm. A lot of parents have brought up the fact that they've tried to motivate their kids, and the kids just basically to tell them not interested in hearing from you, and they walk away. I mean, what gauge should you use for either to bring in a coach or a tutor or even a college level student who they might respect more and listen to?
I would say if the relationship with your child is being compromised on the altar of academic performance, that's when I want really your relationship with your child is so much more important than getting a B on a report card. And so if you see that your relationship is becoming compromised, that's when you want to step back and say, you know what, maybe I'm not the best person. You don't need to spend a ton of money. Sometimes the resources are right there for you. I can remember when I was working with this kid, and he was in 8th grade at the time, and he needed help in his cumulative subjects, but he also just even at home would give his mother a really hard time about getting his work done. And so we found a homework club for him that she didn't even know existed after school, and it worked wonders because even though he didn't really want to go, and even though he went and his homework wasn't perfect, at least it was done. So for these kids, I think don't worry about the quality. Leave the quality up to the teacher. It's really just getting it done, completeness that you want to worry about. Like you said, Wayne, it doesn't have to be a professional educator. It can be maybe a college student. Maybe there's a neighbor. It could be that the teacher has office hours. There could be a study hall where maybe your child needs more of a supervised study hall instead of just a regular, do whatever you want study hall. And often with kids with IEPs and 504s, they provide this in school. So I would absolutely ask the free question first if that is an issue, and talk to the counselor, talk to the teacher. talk to neighbors and your friends with kids that have also struggled in this area and see what you can get. That doesn't cost a lot. That is an option as well.
Yeah. Going back to that 504 plan, my son has a 504 plan in high school. Should I talk to each individual teacher or to the social worker / school psych? In middle school, the homeroom teacher didn't tell the other teachers, and I didn't find out until mid-year. So I wound up emailing each of them. So, I don't know, your best advice?
My advice would be reach out to each teacher, even if you just send an email and just introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm super excited that Jimmy's in your class this year. And as you may know, he has a 504. Here are the goals. And you don't have to lay out like every last detail of the goals, but it could just be like, the 3 things and 3 bullet points. I just wanted to make you aware. You probably already know this because I know you meet as a team with the other teachers and the caseworker, but I just wanted to introduce myself. So it's kind of innocuous and it's very, very positive. I think that's fine. And that I've seen that time and time again where you think that all the teachers know about it, but they don't.
Mm-hmm. There's a mom asking about a teen who really loves and hyper-focuses on arts and music. And she wants to know, how much do you attempt to curb this to encourage her to address the main core classes?
This happens a lot where kids, have these specialty areas where they're very good at something in their life. And you certainly don't want to curtail that enthusiasm, because it's likely that that's what's going to get them far. That's what's going to get them into college. That's probably what they're going to major in. And they're probably going to make a really good living for themselves by doing what they're passionate in. And so as much as you can talk to kids about, a balance of, yes, these things are important in order to go to this art college that you might be interested in, or in order to, have the grades to go to take this, whatever it might be that your child wants to do. These are the steps leading up to it. I've also found that some parents will find a college counselor, or it could be somebody in the school. In some schools, they call it career services, where they will meet with your child and talk to them about what they need to do to get to the next step. So sometimes it's not it may not be a college degree, but it could be a certificate program. But often kids are just in the now. They don't really think about what's ahead 2 or 3 years. They just exist in the current moment. And so by having somebody else talk to them that's not you is often very successful, because that kind of motivates them a little bit to think more about how their grades now can impact their future.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. Very good. This is a question from a mom who has an older teen. As we think about college, which test should my 16-year-old son take? The SAT or ACT? He has been diagnosed with hyperactive ADHD, and he gets nervous taking any type of test. Didn't know if you had any opinion on that.
Sure. So the ACT versus the SAT, that's a question that a lot of parents have as their kids get ready to take the tests. My experience has been that most kids with an LD or ADHD tend to prefer the ACT better. It is a slightly shorter test. It's a faster paced test, which a lot of times we say, that may not be so great. But the questions are a little bit more straightforward than the SAT. And sometimes kids have a hard time reading between the lines. They're not sure exactly what the question is asking them. But when the questions are super clear, like the ACT questions are a little bit clearer than the SAT. They're more like test questions they'd see in school. They feel more comfortable with it. So if your child is going to get accommodations, for example, time and a half or double time, generally, we've found that these students like the ACT better. The only way you'll truly know is by having your child take a practice ACT and a practiced SAT, and then comparing the results. We have a concordance table. So if anybody ever gets in that situation and they have 2 practice test scores, I'm happy to throw them into our concordance table and tell you which test your child did better on. And then we really recommend that kids only prepare for one test. These days, it's super common for kids to just take a bunch of tests, take both tests, prepare equally, but it's number one, takes more time because you're preparing for two tests and more stressful. So the bottom line is, if your child has accommodations, consider the ACT, even if, the SAT has a stronghold in your area. I live in Washington, D.C. The SAT has been predominant here, but we see more and more kids every year going towards the ACT.
Another mom asks, you mentioned educational coaches. Do schools typically have these available, or where do you find these?
Usually they're private coaches that specialize in educational or in executive function. So sometimes it could be a tutor who will also help with being organized and planning ahead. Sometimes that's all they do is just those executive functioning skills. Sometimes schools will have a period during the day where they'll offer this kind of service. So I would ask your counselor, do you do anything like this in school that my child can be a part of? And if not, and you want to hire somebody privately, you can certainly do that. Or if that isn't something that you want to do, there are little things that you can do as a parent. And those are the things like the clean sweep I mentioned, having that appointment with your child on Sunday night to get organized for the week or to see what assignments do you have coming up. Those are little things that parents can do that can make a significant difference.
One last question. One mom is referencing what you said earlier about sports, and she said, I just heard you say that you would try to allow kids to stay in sports if at all possible. How do you feel about taking sports away intermittently when/if they make a decision to not make school a priority, not getting homework completed and turned in, etc.?
I'm not sure about that. I guess I'd have to have more information about the particular child. Now, some kids, in general, kids respond to positive reinforcement better than negative reinforcement. The research shows that. But some kids may respond to a more heavy-handed approach that is, this is a privilege in our home. So in order for you to play lacrosse, you need to keep these grades. I'm here to support you, but this is how it is in our family. So if that has worked in your house and your child has been super responsive and cooperative, then it's probably okay. But if you found that your child gets angry, you may not, and sometimes it can backfire, or there's lots of fights over it, or they feel depressed or anxious, then I would probably think about a different way of going about it. Perhaps it's that privileges over the weekend are tied to homework completion instead of playing a sport. Like you can use the car if you have these things done. Or yes, you can go to the mall or on Friday night if I know that your homework has been turned in. That might be better. That approach might be better than taking away a sport.
Yeah, that's good advice. I like that. That was the last question. Really a terrific presentation, Ann. Great insights and strategies.
Thank you for having me, Wayne.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I know we all got a lot out of it. And have a good day.
For more Attitude Podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.